Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, July 28th. We begin tonight with a look at the PBO's latest fiscal sustainability report. The Parliamentary Budget Officer's report concludes that Canada's current fiscal policy is sustainable over the long term. It says the country's overall debt level is projected to decline steadily, but it cautions the fiscal policies of some provincial governments are not sustainable. This is because of the rising healthcare expenses they face due to the aging population. All right, well, meanwhile, Public Safety Canada has released a price list outlining how much money owners of banned weapons can get under a mandatory federal buyback program. The owner of a Swiss Arms SG-550 could get more than $6,200, while an AR-15 owner could expect to get more than $1,300. The program covers more than 1,500 models and variants of what the government considers assault-style firearms that were banned 2 years ago. All right, turning to an online streaming bill being passed through Parliament as Washington raises concerns about the trade implications around it. The bill would force U.S. streaming platforms such as Netflix and YouTube to fund Canada's creative industries. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai voiced concerns about the bill during talks this month with International Trade Minister Mary Ng. Michael Geist is the University of Ottawa's Canada Research Chair in Internet Law, and he warns that Canada could face hundreds of millions of dollars in tariffs in retaliation by the U.S. But the spokeswoman for Ms. Ng says the online streaming bill is in line with Canada's trade obligations. All of this comes as the U.S. Senate Majority Leader has reached a deal that could ensure the security of Canada's auto sector in the country. Chuck Schumer and West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin are proposing to set aside a tax credit plan that favored American-made electric vehicles. Instead, they are suggesting an amendment to Joe Biden's climate and health bill, which would expand the credits to include all of North America. Canada's ambassador to the U.S. says Ottawa has been relentless in its efforts to convince Congress and the White House to abandon the plan that discriminates against Canada's auto sector. Well, once again today, Pope Francis failed to deliver an apology for the sexual abuse that Indigenous children suffered in residential schools. He focused his sermon during Mass at Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré, Quebec, on the need to face one's failures and disappointments. Before Mass started, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the Pope's trip to Canada was a step toward healing, but he also acknowledged that there is a lot of work to do to correct the wounds of the past. On the East Coast, Newfoundland and Labrador has its first probable case of monkeypox. Quebec has reported 346 cases of the disease since the start of the outbreak, which is the highest number in Canada. The World Health Organization declared the virus a public health emergency of international concern last weekend, and Public Health Canada is now advising men who have sex with men to practice safe sex and reduce their number of partners to limit the spread. Meanwhile, a research director on a project to compile information on COVID-19 in long-term care homes says they don't have enough information to keep updating the database. Dr. Samir Sinha says they are pausing the program because provinces and territories aren't making enough data publicly available. He wants some independent body to be given a mandate to collect and present the data. The long-term care COVID-19 tracker project has been run by the National Institute on Aging at Toronto Metropolitan University since the spring of 2020. All right, moving to a potential shortage of epidural tubes in Canada, which has one doctor voicing her concerns. A spokeswoman for the Canadian Anesthesiologists Society says there is a frustrating lack of information from manufacturers and healthcare providers about the shortage. The tubes are used to provide pain relief for women during labor and delivery. Dr. Lucy Filto says a coordinated approach is needed for all provinces and territories, which could be experiencing shortages during what may be a global supply issue. A Health Canada report listing medical device shortages says the situation involves a company in Pennsylvania. Forum Daily will be right back with more news from around the world. But when we return, we're going to take a look at traveling delays and investing. We'll speak with Brendan Caldwell, director of Caldwell Securities Limited. And we're going to take a look at airline earnings stock valuations and rising travel prices. After that, we'll have more on the major news and headlines from across Canada and around the world. So stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break. Passengers flying out of Vancouver International Airport may have to pack some snacks if unionized workers with a catering company go on strike. Employees of Gate Gourmet, which supplies meals, snacks, and beverages to airlines, have issued a 72-hour strike notice. Unite Here Local 40 says pandemic layoffs led to a significant reduction in staff, and workers haven't been replaced, despite a surge in air travel. This comes after WestJet narrowly avoided a strike action on Sunday after it reached a tentative labor deal with the union representing hundreds of workers at the Calgary and Vancouver airports. Meanwhile, airport delays continue to plague travelers as Toronto's Pearson Airport has topped a list of the world's worst airports for delays this summer. In fact, it was the only Canadian airport to crack the top 10 of a CNN list. All right, well, joining us now to give us an idea about how staffing issues and travel delays can impact the markets is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back.
Thank you, Nima. I'm glad to be here and not traveling.
Definitely. Now, we know Air Canada's earnings come out next week on August 1st, but their shares also dropped recently. What's the reason behind that, Brendan?
Well, I think you covered a lot of it. Despite the fact that people are wanting to travel, desperate to travel, both for business and for pleasure, we've been locked down for the last 2 years. And my kids have told me the only reason their generation is holding on at all is in the hopes that this will be the roaring 20s. Well, now that the caps are largely off, we can't actually go anywhere, at least not with any ease or enjoyment. So it's at the very time when the airlines should be doing a robust business. Air Canada's price is down roughly to the levels where it was during the summer of 2020.
Now, that's pretty concerning. And if we look at the other major Canadian airline here, WestJet, now WestJet stock was actually delisted last year. Why did that happen?
It was actually a little while before that. I think it was taken over by Onyx, which is a private equity firm, and I think they took it over, if I'm not mistaken, in 2019, which can't help but leave a little smirk on my face. But so if you want to play WestJet as an investment, Onyx is a good way of going about that. If you think this thing is going to get solved, if you want to play it as a straight up investment, sure, Air Canada, which is still a good airline to actually fly. It's just the coming and going, getting on and getting off is a bit of a problem. But if you wanted to play it in a hedged way, Onyx is the owner of WestJet.
Some good advice there, Brendan. Now, bringing this back to our viewers, they're seeing a lot of travel prices go up. So is this purely because of the rising price of fuel?
It's all of a piece. So yes, fuel prices are rising, and I don't think there's going to be a slowdown in that, particularly. But also wages are rising. I mean, you talked about the strike during your intro. That's, again, not limited just even to the airline space. It's hard to get workers in any area. But then the price of just about everything else is going up as well. Plus, I mean, the cost of flying, if the planes aren't moving constantly, the cost to the airlines of keeping the planes goes up. So they want to keep those planes in motion in the air as much as possible. So there's a lot of factors going into it for the airlines, but it's, I think, symptomatic of a larger economic issue at play with a variety of industries.
All right, Brendan, about a minute and a half left here, but I want to jump to these delays we're seeing. We're seeing baggage delays, customs delays, travel delays. But considering a resurgence of travel was expected following the lifting of restrictions, where did our travel authorities go wrong in terms of preparing for this?
Well, you have to assume that they all assume that it's gone wrong. Because keep in mind, throughout COVID, the mentality has been they don't really want people to travel. Our government's been very clear about the fact they don't want people to travel. And given that we are the most restrictive country in terms of masking and testing, really that's out there, I mean, maybe not the most, but we're right up there. It's, I think, still the case that our government really doesn't want people to travel. So what we see as a bug, others may see as a feature. So now if you're a commercial airline, you're pointing the finger at the airports. If the airports, you're pointing the finger at the federal government. Everybody's pointing their finger at somebody else. but really it will take a coordinated effort between the federal government, the airports, and the airlines to solve this. But what I think we're seeing universally is largely the fingers being pointed back at the passengers. Did you really need to travel anyway? So.
Some interesting things to consider, Brendan. Always an interesting conversation with you, Brendan. We look forward to having another one next week. New federal government research finds that 25% of Canadians surveyed have unfair perceptions about people who take opioids and disapprove of them. An equal percentage hold sympathetic views, while the remaining 50% are on the fence. Advocates say the government can do more to reduce stigma around people who use opioids. This includes encouraging parents to talk to their teenage kids about harm reduction for the drugs. Moving to Ontario now, as its COVID-19 booking portal opened this morning. This for parents who want to book vaccine appointments for their babies over the age of 6 months and preschoolers. Families can also make appointments through health units that have their own booking systems and through some doctors and pharmacies. Health Canada approved Moderna's Spikevax pediatric shot earlier this month. To the west, the city of Victoria is the latest to open 3 cooling centres in response to a heat warning from Environment Canada. Temperatures in the BC capital and most of Vancouver Island are expected to soar to 31 degrees Celsius. Heat warnings of even higher temperatures were in place this morning for most of the BC mainland, Alberta, and west central Saskatchewan. Daytime highs were forecast to be in the mid-30s today and through to Sunday. Tensions rise in Saskatchewan, where a man accused of threatening Premier Scott Moe and Chief Medical Health Officer Dr. Saqib Shahab last year didn't show up for a court appearance this morning. A judge has issued a warrant for the arrest of Tobichi Okuno. He was charged with 2 counts of uttering threats after someone sent threatening emails to the 2 officials. On the East Coast, the new art gallery of Nova Scotia has been placed on hold by the province. Slated to be built on the Halifax waterfront, construction of the new gallery was expected to cost around $137 million. But the province says a recent independent estimate projected a cost increase of at least $25 million. And it's most likely significantly more due to rising inflation and increased construction costs. Originally announced in April 2019, the province committed $70 million to the project, while Ottawa pledged $20 million. The city of Halifax promised $7 million, and a $10 million pledge was made by the Sobery Foundation in November 2020. More details emerge about sexual harassment cases in the world of Canadian sports, this time in soccer. An independent review by McLaurin Global Sports Solution has concluded that Canada Soccer mishandled sexual harassment allegations in 2008. They were against then under-20 women's coach Bob Berarda. Mr. Berarda pleaded guilty in February to 3 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of sexual touching. This was while he was in a position of authority, and it involved 4 teenage soccer players that he coached between 1988 and 2008. The 125-page report says Mr. Berarda engaged in what the Canadian Soccer Association should have identified as highly questionable proscribed relationships, communications, and activities with his female players. All right, well, this comes as England and Germany are set for a historic Euro 2022 final on Sunday at Wembley Stadium. A tournament record crowd of nearly 90,000 is expected for the European Championship final. This highlights the growing stature of women's soccer in Europe. England is aiming to win its first major women's tournament title, while Germany is an 8-time champion. Turning to a big merger announcement among 2 U.S. airlines. JetBlue is buying Spirit Airlines in a deal worth $3.8 billion. This comes just a day after Spirit and Frontier Airlines agreed to abandon their merger proposal. JetBlue will acquire Spirit for $33.50 per share in cash if Spirit stockholders approve the transaction. The combined airline will have a fleet of 458 aircraft. Meanwhile, Amazon is raising its Prime fees in Europe. The company has announced that the annual cost of its top-tier service will go up to the equivalent of $114.26. In Spain, the annual cost will go up to $50.54. Similar increases are being put into place in Germany, France, and Italy. Earlier this year, Amazon raised the price of a Prime membership in the U.S. from $119 to $139 a year. All right, looks like NASA is launching 2 more mini helicopters to Mars in its effort to return rocks and soil samples to Earth. NASA's Perseverance rover has been collecting samples and will transport them to the rocket, which will launch them off the red planet a decade from now. If the rover breaks down, the 2 helicopters being launched later this decade would load the samples onto the rocket. After the break, we'll have a look at more news and headlines from around the world, so stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back. The U.S. economy shrank in both the first and second quarters, raising fears that the U.S. may be approaching a recession. The U.S. Commerce Department says the economy contracted at a 0.9% annual pace in the second quarter. This was following a 1.6% decline from January through March. Consecutive quarters of falling GDP constitute one informal indicator of a recession. New forecasts by Australia's government seem to calm fears around a recession in that country. The government says runaway inflation will remain unacceptably high for the next 2 years, while economic growth will slow without falling into recession. Treasurer Jim Chalmers outlined to Parliament on Thursday a deterioration in the country's economic outlook since a new government was elected in May. Rising inflation and a global slowdown are key economic challenges. Inflation rose by 3.5% last year, 5.1% in the year through March, and 6.1% in the year through June. Mr. Chalmers said inflation was now expected to peak at 7.75% in the December quarter. Inflation is forecast to fall to an acceptable level of 2.75% in late 2024. Meanwhile, Russian, French, and American leaders are crisscrossing Africa to win support for their positions on the war in Ukraine. They are waging what some say is the most intense competition for influence on the continent since the Cold War. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and French President Emmanuel Macron are visiting several African countries this week. Mr. Lavrov is blaming the West for rising food prices, while Mr. Macron has accused the Kremlin of cynically using food as a weapon and waging an imperial-style war of conquest. Turning to North Korea, where leader Kim Jong-un is boasting his military capabilities amid tensions with the U.S. and South Korea. Mr. Kim has warned he's ready to use his nuclear weapons in potential military conflicts with the 2 nations. State media reported Mr. Kim made such a warning in a Wednesday speech, which was marking the 69th anniversary of the end of the 1950 to 1953 Korean War. Some experts say Mr. Kim's threats were apparently meant to boost internal unity in the impoverished country, which is suffering pandemic-related economic difficulties. Moving to Mali now, where the army says at least 3 civilians and 15 Malian soldiers have been killed in separate attacks in Mali's central region. This is the latest round of attacks as insecurity worsens in the West African nation. An army spokesman said 2 attacks on Wednesday targeted Mali army positions in the center of the country, and the army fought back, killing at least 48 assailants. No group has claimed responsibility for the attacks, but they bear the mark of jihadi rebels linked to al-Qaeda who are present in those areas, and whose local leader sent a message a few weeks ago urging his fighters to intensify attacks against the Malian army. This comes as African health officials say the continent of 1.3 billion people still does not have a single dose of the monkeypox vaccine. This even though it's the only continent to have documented deaths from the disease, which has been newly declared as a global emergency. The acting head of the Africa CDC is warning the international community that solutions need to be global in nature because if Africans aren't safe, the rest of the world is not safe. Back in the U.S., former Republican and Democrat officials announced the formation of a new national third party in the United States. The new party, named Forward, is a merger of 3 organizations from across the political spectrum. These include the Forward Party, Renew America Movement, and the Serve America Movement. In its announcement, Forward says it looks to transform American politics and reject political extremes. The party is set to officially launch at a national convention in summer of 2023. 4-time Formula One champion Sebastian Vettel is going to retire at the end of the season. The German driver says he wants to spend more time with his family. Mr. Vettel became the youngest world champion at 23 in 2010, and he won 53 races, the 3rd highest total in F1 behind Lewis Hamilton and Michael Schumacher. He won an F1 record 13 races in 2013. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website at thenewsforum.ca and make sure to follow our social media handles on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You could also watch all of our commentary, programming, and interviews on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, thanks for joining us on Forum Daily News, and we'll see you again next time. Take care, Canada.